We have a few moments for questions. We're good? Okay. Then we're going to jump into some questions. And I don't know if you want to take audience participation on this panel, or I think we will. But let me ask the first question while you're getting the microphone. Everybody have their hand held. Sarah brought it up, and it's a big issue in these discussions. I would never bring anything back to my dairy farmers here in California if I didn't have some way to pay for the intervention. It's just not something I'm going to walk into a room and feel comfortable doing. So let's talk about that piece of it. Who's going to pay for the intervention? And let's just start with Katie and move on down the supply chain, because it's the big issue in the room when we're having these discussions about supply chain interventions and reductions. So.
Yeah, so I think it probably depends on the intervention, right? So in the best ideal scenario, right, you have an intervention that reduces methane or makes something more efficient, and they can actually see it on their farm, right? So they have less feed, they have less open cows, whatever it may be, that they can actually realize that value from a production efficiency standpoint. So that's best case scenario, because then you don't really need this extra incentive. The question, though, is one, like, how do you get credit for what you're doing, and how do you actually quantify that? And I do think that that does require incentive. When we talk about dairy, it's not just a beef problem, a dairy problem. We look at all these producers, and having worked with a lot of them, and these are the more sophisticated, bigger dairies, like, we shouldn't underestimate how much time the data input piece is and what it takes to actually get good, reliable data. And it doesn't have to be perfect, but I do think there has to be, if there's not an incentive for the intervention, there needs to be an incentive for the data and that data transaction in order to get good quality data, so that when a Mars or a whomever is making a claim, they feel like they have the right validation behind that. So to me, I think there's lots of ways it could be. It could be a government incentive, right? We've seen some of those in the past. Unfortunately, a lot of them are currently on hold. So there could be some government incentive. There could be private funding, whether it's a food company or others. There's a lot of philanthropical organizations that are sometimes investing as well, Gates Foundation and others. So I don't think it's going to be one particular person that steps up and has to pay for it. I think it's going to be multiple different people coming to the table, depending on the intervention and where it's at in the industry.
All right. EDF, you want to give us your perspective?
I guess that was quite holistic. Nothing else to add.
Let's see. I remember during my QE, if I didn't know, I should just say I don't know. And sometimes I don't know who pays, but I will say when there is a win-win within the industry, I think it is a collaborative work between, and some of the things that are mentioned today, between NGOs, between packers and processors and retailers all coming together. I think what's really critical is that we focus on what those win-wins are. I think some of the best ones, that I've come across, like Working Lands from Wildlife, what they did with the Sage Grouse Initiative was amazing. Looking at keeping off invasive species to help ranchers be able to, the grasslands are everything. And if you can help with grazing management, that is the foundation of the beef supply chain. And I think everybody coming together to the table, I think that's one of the greatest win-wins available. I would say being reliant on the government is dicey. And if you cannot go from year to year without government help, it gets very risky. And so can we come together as industries and NGOs together to partner and use that extension? I think that helps with risk management.
Joanna, anything you'd like to add?
Yes, thank you. The clicker and the mic. No, I do think Katie gave a incredibly comprehensive answer. I would just add, there are certainly instances where this takes an enormous amount, in some cases, of initial investment. Multiple parties are needed. But the goal, when we talk about reaching scale, is to also reach economies of scale. And so over time, move us down the cost curve. And so I think having a longer-term mindset, understanding that investment is needed today to ultimately, get us to a place where the costs look better on a per unit basis, is the reality of the situation.
All right. Finally, anything from Mars to add to this discussion?
Yeah, I think it's been pretty comprehensively covered. I think what I would also point out, it's being paid one way or the other, right? It's just that there are cost that we don't see it from a long-term perspective that we are incurring as a society. So I think the question is, like, do we take accountability for it, and how do we figure out a mechanism across the value chain that addresses some of those concerns? So we don't necessarily have all the answers, where again, we go back to right now, we have a view from a 2030 perspective. We are putting in $47 million that can help achieve our targets. Beyond that, we really need solutions that are more economical, right? So going back to the principle, one of the principles is freedom. For us to have the freedom to deploy some of these solutions, financial sustainability needs to be thought through, and that needs to be baked in as part of the solution set as well. I think that's the last point I think I would also say is that just given the current macroeconomic environment, I don't think the consumer willingness to pay is significantly there. There's also challenges from a traceability point of view to be able to kind of make claims. So for us to get to a point to say that, okay, what incentivizes us, right? Either from a consumer point of view, or do we want to see that come from regulation eventually? One way or the other, we'll have to, as an industry, find a solution.
Thank you. Looks like we've got a question from the audience.
Congrats to all for the panel. I have a question to Sarah. Sarah, you know how many animals, or the percentage of animals are fattening in feedlots in Brazil?
So I was looking at the statistics from the USDA, and there are close to 9 million, and obviously we know the cow herd, including the dairy, is close to 100, so that seems small. I would say if you look at some of the packers, that it will have a higher percentage out of the total cattle that are being killed are in the confinamientos.
No, they are killed about 17%. The rest animals are raised on grass. It's grass-fed. So that I think you missed some information there.
In our business, we're doing close to 35, 40. So it's a little different than the average.
No. Oh, in your business, you say the feedlots of JBS in Brazil?
Yes, sir.
Okay, I know them well.
Yeah. All right, we have another question. Looks like Joe's got the mic.
Yeah, this is for Katie. It's sort of a two-part question. The first part, I think you had a slide on there where you're showing, you had Bovaer, then you had Rumensin, and you have an additive effect. You seem quite confident that there is an additive effect there. Is that true? And then the second one was, my impression when it comes to Bovaer that there's these government incentives that are really required to make this, profitable for the farmer. And I guess what critical role is that going to be for the future of your growth and enhanced adoption and whatnot?
Yeah, so good question. So on the Bovaer and Rumensin, so if I did not intend to show them as additive, they're both listed on there. What we are doing is a lot of phase 4, or a lot of research right now looking at it to say, is there additive? We believe that they likely are in some scenario, but we can't say that today. So what we're promoting, what we're working with producers is they're either feeding Bovaer or they're feeding Rumensin. What we do a combination is in a herd, right? So right now, Bovaer is only labeled for lactating dairy cows. So we do have some herds that are feeding Bovaer and the lactating dairy cows, and they're feeding Rumensin to their dry cows and their heifers. And so you'll see a farm that may be getting carbon credits for both Bovaer and Rumensin, but it's not necessarily in the same animal. But we're doing the research to say, is it additive or not? Is it 1.7? Is it 1.5? Is it 2.0? I have no idea. But we're working on getting that science, and then we'll update our protocols and methodologies once we have the science and the meta-analysis on the combined protocol. So that's on that one. On the government incentives, so they are currently on hold or frozen or whatever terminology that you currently want to use. It's still something that we're advocating and working with a number of our lead partners. So there's a lot of processors and others that are partnering with us on that and continue to advocate for them. We see it as an important part of really getting it jump-started in the marketplace. I think Joanne mentioned it. A lot of times it takes a lot of upfront cash to get something started, and we're working with our partners at DSM getting into a new manufacturing facility here in the next 18 months, and that's really our critical next step. So we see them as in the short term. Do we need them right now? Yes, because we're at a smaller pilot manufacturing facility that just quite candidly has higher cost of goods. And then as we get into a new manufacturing facility, we see the need for the government incentives to go away. So it's creating a short-term gap that we're working through and still trying to get those through the USDA. But long-term, no, we don't see the need for subsidies for Bovaer.
Do we have another question?
Yeah, thank you. I'm just reflecting on Steve yesterday about the 15% of the heifers and the cow-calf that aren't getting in-calf. And it seems to me like the ROI for those farms would be quite high. And I'm not sure in most cases what the upfront capital cost would be to make that happen, but it wouldn't strike me as being sort of significant in most cases. It's probably more knowledge and management than infrastructure. But my question is, in thinking about that and the incentives, maybe to Sarah, but anyone else who has information, the 750,000 family farm cow-calf systems that are at the top of the upstream part of the value chain, do you or anyone have any idea how many of those are the sole source of income or primary source of income for that family, or a secondary source of income? And how might that affect the ability to reach those farms and actually have change occur? Like, are some farmers hobby farmers and couldn't care less, and what percentage of that 750,000 might be reachable because there's an incentive as the primary source of income to do something better?
That is an excellent question, and I believe NCBA does have a lot of those statistics. But one thing I would say is going to a rancher and being like, I have a solution, and the solution is for you to change how you operate. It's like going up to a parent and telling them, I have a different way for you to raise your kids. Like, excuse me? So you have to remember that this is very challenging, and I was talking with professors in the room about who are in extension, and like it is tough to bring something new to the table, and maybe that new thing is culling your cows that are open, but they're concerned about having enough cows on the place, maintaining that BLM permit. There's a lot of complications, so it's lower hanging, but you still have to jump to get the fruit. And I would say that the average cow herd in the U.S., and Sam Worth, please correct me if I'm wrong, it's in the 40s? 35, okay, so it's even lower than I thought. So 35, and just putting it out there, you can't make a living for you and your family with 35 head. So at the end of the day, yes, sir, that is one of the issues is if this is your hobby business, to put in infrastructure and these kind of things, like traceability or a feed additive or changing your operational practice, it gets really, really tough.
How are we doing on time? One more? Okay.
Hi, thanks. I have a question for Katie. My name is Ashish. You showed a slide where you showed the sustainable dairy value chain anchored around the feed additives like Boer. And you told us that the farmers would buy, or the producers would buy the feed additive. I'm assuming that they would be compensated through the income from carbon credits. So my question is, whose responsibility in that value chain is to generate the carbon credits? I'm assuming it's someone like Athian. They would sell it to someone like Mars. Is that correct? And maybe then Mars would procure milk from those farmers, because then you want to call it as an inset. Is that what you meant?
Yeah, so I think there's many pathways, right? So I can kind of maybe talk high level on a couple of them that we see and how they're occurring. So in all the pathways, the one thing that is consistent, whether it's Elanco sitting down with a Mars or an Athian or another organization, is we're gonna sit down with Mars and say, okay, who do you procure milk from? Where are those locations? How much is there? Because that's foundational to all of it, is making sure that we have some traceability, at least back to the processing plant that they're purchasing from that standpoint. So that is foundational, I'd say, across the board, regardless of how they're actually monetizing the transaction. From that standpoint, outside of that, then you're gonna have different iterations. So sometimes what we're doing is Elanco's actually partnering with a Mars or another organization and advocating on behalf of the producers and saying, you have 200,000 cows in this milk shed, there's X number of producers that'd be willing to feed Bovaer, and brokering a deal, for lack of a better way to say that. And then sometimes we may facilitate that with an Athian and help them actually, then they take over the transaction from there and would have the contract with a Mars and with the producer. Sometimes there's another third party like an AgSpire, which is a project developer that may get involved instead of an Athian. So we really partner with the food companies on what is their preferred way of connecting back to the producers and working with them on those solutions. So it can take a variety of ways, but it's always from a a food company standpoint, making sure that we're actually getting into their supply sheds is foundational across the board.
Yeah, and I'd say that's our experience here in California. If you've got direct shippers like Nestle does in the state, you can work through that channel. But if not, you're probably going to be working with one of the co-ops as the middleman in the transaction. I don't know if you wanted to.
No, I just wanted to confirm, right? Like we would prefer insets rather than offsets directly in our supply chain.
And I can tell you from the dairy industry's perspective, I'm a big fan of insets because a lot of what we've done to date is offsetting and it's outside our supply chain, and I'm concerned about that going forward. One last question. Sam.
Not just, sorry, ooh, that's loud. Sarah, you were right, it's 47 head per operation, and about a quarter of all of our beef producers have 500 head or more, so those would be the ones that would have the most probably potential for some of these solutions, right? But I will say in terms of thinking through like willingness to adopt, the report that Steve referenced, that USRSB did with Trust in Beef yesterday, that's available on our website. It's the State of Grazing Management. It has a lot of really cool insights on how producers think about adopting new technology, pending where they're located in the US. And it's tied to grazing management, but it's not. There's a ton of other kind of like psychosocial insights there. So I would say, like, for anyone here that's kind of thinking about these things on producer adoption, that's a really cool report to look into on like how do we reach and where should we be thinking about where's that movable middle that's worth engaging.
All right.
And just to quickly add to that too, sorry. One of the best programs that the beef industry has done, and again, another shout out to Jim Olchin who helped start this, was the Beef Quality Assurance Program. So we had a big problem in the industry with injection site lesions from giving like injections all over the body. Now we all know to give it in the triangle of the neck, and so we've reduced injection site lesions by 95%, and that's because producers want to be a part of this program. They saw value, and even ones that didn't go through the program, they learned from word of mouth. So if we can kind of replicate that in the quote sustainability space, maybe we can start seeing those gains.
All right, that's it. Big round of applause for my panel.